Hello everyone and welcome to See-Through Panel. This is a comic book review and graphic novel discussion podcast. My name is Fahed Rahman and today I am joined by Kate Sherron. Kate is an artist, designer, comic book writer and professor of sequential art at Savannah College of Art and Design, where she earned her MFA in illustration many years ago. Kate has worked on a number of licensed all-age properties including Invader Zim and My Little Pony, and is an artist and creator for the creator-owned Chained to the Grave and Silk Hills. She currently lives and works in Savannah, Georgia. How are you doing, Kate?
Oh, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. So I always like to start off with a couple of jokes to help my guests relax. Why do ducks have tail feathers?
I don't know. Why do ducks have tail feathers?
To cover up their butt quacks.
Well, that's dumb. I like it.
A book fell on my head today. I've only got my shelf to blame.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah. Okay. Today we're discussing The Bend of Luck by Peter and Maria Hoey, and I'll read out the blurb for the book. Imagine a world where luck is the most ephemeral of ideas, has a physical form. Precious stones of luck, mined like gold, are worn as bringers of fortune. But luck breaks both ways. While the blue gems may grant advantage to those who wear them, their blessing is fickle and unpredictable. In the blink of an eye, good luck can turn bad. We follow the life of a man who comes into possession of some powerful stones, but the success enjoyed by the father goes awry when he tries to pass this luck onto his son. In alternating scenes between the two generations, The Bend of Luck follows Felicity's course like an arrow through a family's destiny. When I contacted you, Kate, I gave you a few options about which book we would discuss, and you chose The Bend of Luck. What drew you to the book?
Well, I had been, it's been many years since I've read, Coin Up, some of the older Coin Up comics, but I was at least, somewhat familiar. And so I was curious just kind of what they've been up to of late and was just interested. The cover was, I like stuff that's very design-y and interestingly structured. And so I thought this looked just off the bat like it would probably scratch that itch.
To start off with, let's talk a little bit about, so we were reviewing PDF, so we haven't got the actual physical product of what the book would look like, but from the PDF it looks like the book would be square in design. Would you kind of agree with
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
And I think geometry plays they make some very interesting choices with the geometry within the book, both in terms of like the panel layout and in terms of the character designs. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so I thought it was really interesting because, like, anytime you get away from that vertical page that we are traditionally used to, it really changes how you have to think about how you're laying out that page. And so, if you go back to thinking about timing, pacing in a very sort of Scott McCloud kind of way, it feels like there's less of a forward momentum when you don't have that vertical page. Now, obviously, different people respond to layouts differently, and stop me if I get into full-on professor mode. School starts next week, and so if you can't tell, I'm already gearing up.
Yeah.
But that idea of as soon as you get out of let me retrace my steps. If you get into a layout or a composition that is essentially square, same on or close to, same on each sides, it has a tendency to feel a little bit more circular, a little bit more stagnant, because you're kind of getting into, like, you don't have a direction. You're not given a direction to go. Whereas if, like, the page is longer than it is wide, your brain tends to kind of pull you down. And so I think that already right from the start, when you're working with a square image, to try to get your reader to kind of move forward can be a challenge, but it could be a boon if you're wanting your reader to take a little bit more of a meditative pace with things. And I think that this is definitely a book in the kind of cold clinical language that it's written in, the fact that you have these opposing timelines and it's kind of indicated when you're switching, but kind of not. It is a story that is more being told to you than being shown to you in a lot of ways. I think that having that sort of meditative pace really serves it well, because it's not going to definitely drive you forward with punches and kicks and kapows and explosions and things.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It took a couple of pages for me to kind of get into the flow of things. Most of the pages, I believe, are told in no more than 5 panels. They use both rectangular panels, and they quite often use circular inset panels. They use those to kind of, especially in dialogue moments when they want to specifically punctuate the power or kind of the significance of what someone is saying. And I felt that worked particularly well. One of my favorite pages is kind of like on page 15, where they've got this 9 panel layout of bridge over, I think it's over San Francisco, and I think that kind of works particularly well as a scene setting page. But yes, kind of like the geometry of it. I wonder what kind of why they went for that, and I think probably you're right. It is a more meditative story. It's not really that action packed, though there are kind of like action sequences within the story. It's very much more. It is very much more a story where it's being like narrated to you rather than shown to you, as you said.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when there are those moments of violence or action, they're really stiff. And I mean, to be fair, that's kind of part of their style, their oeuvre, of these very sort of iconographic, infographic kind of very design centered sort of character designs and world designs. But like, I think it really serves well. It's like, well, this is kind of the world, the visual world that we work in. Then let us kind of tell a story that works within that. And so something that is incredibly dialogue driven, incredibly action driven, I don't know if it would work well in this style, but a very much like, I'm going to tell you a story. And this is as much a kind of a fairy tale fable sort of story, a cautionary tale, sort of speak. It has that very weight to it, as in like, I'm going to tell you a story, but there is a moral at the center of it, a caution at the center of it. And so I think keeping that sort of rhythm, letting us kind of sit and think on things, but like, they don't break the grid a ton, except with occasional circles. Every once in a while, one or two things might break the panel border, but it's still very methodical and very precise. And I think that is very serving. The story that they're telling matches well with the style that they're using.
Going on to the style of the artistic design choices they make, especially with the characters' faces. I mean, you could almost swap out almost all the characters' faces. Really, the only thing that changes is like the hair, and maybe like the facial hair really is kind of the only thing that really changes across the characters. They've all got pretty similar head shapes in terms of kind of the way that they look, and they're almost what's the word that I'm kind of phrase that I'm looking, not Lego. What was kind of the Lego ripoff that I was thinking of?
Playmobil?
Playmobil. They almost look like Playmobil
Oh my God, you're not
characters.
wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought, well, how is he going to how are they going to portray emotion and like nuance with this art? But they kind of manage it quite well, I think. So how did you feel? Kind of like, might be a bit of an odd question. How did you feel that your ability to kind of emotionally connect with the characters? I think that's quite important when you're reading anything or kind of watching a movie and stuff. How did you feel like the artistic design choice they made about the way the characters looked impacted on your ability to emotionally connect with them?
It kept me at a distance for
Yeah.
much of the book, but I did find myself eventually like coming to, I think it was just because the language that was used in such a way was really austere for something that is really traumatic and tragic.
Yes.
Like, and so like, especially with the wife, less about when we were, back in the flashback to the father-in-law's youth, but more when we're following the wife through this loss. This woman, she's lost her husband, but she doesn't know how. And there's just these big questions and big empty spaces. And every once in a while, like, there's talking about how like she starts to forget his face, and just the mundaneness of having to clean out this business that they shared together. It just kind of really slowly hurts more and more and more the more time you spend with her. It built, and then by the end we reach that ending where there is a hopeful turn, for her, free of these men and their cycles, and
Yeah.
hopefully kind of moving forward in a life of her own. I think I actually felt, I felt good at the end, and I felt it. Like I said, it took a hot minute to connect, but when I really let it sit, and when I really kind of tried to put myself into the emotional space of the wife, it really struck. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the characters are these sort of interchangeable, and they're not super emotive, like, so that you have to have that active reading experience. You can kind of put yourself into these places and into these spaces, because it's not like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of reading up on how they've thought or spoke of creating this book, but that's just kind of my thought coming to
Yeah,
it.
I think you're right. So I think we haven't really spoken a lot about the plot. We'll get that stat in a bit. But one of the choices that they made that I've usually when the writers make this choice or creators make this choice, it really annoys me. But none of the all the characters in the book are nameless. We only basically know them by their roles. So we've got, like you said, the wife, the son, the father, the gamblers,
The
the
captain,
bookies, yeah, the captain. So none of the characters actually given names. I think the closest we get to is, I think, the son's mother's name is mentioned in a letter somewhere. I think.
And if their names are given at any point, I
Yeah,
sure as heck don't remember.
yeah, yeah. So it's, another thing where it kind of does give it kind of like an almost like, as you mentioned before, like a cautionary tale fable like quality to the storytelling. So I'll quickly kind of recap the plot. So the father and he's, I think they're out in the desert somewhere, I think looking for gold or silver, and they come across this pond that contains these pieces of luck, and the story is really about how the father has to kind of hide this luck away and use it very carefully, because it's, being in possession of it is kind of quite a dangerous thing in the world of the story, and how that kind of impacts not only his life but the life of his son, and then kind of the life of his daughter-in-law. It's this generational thing. It's very much about the sins of the father passing on to the son. And when did you think this book was set? What period do you think it was set in?
It took me a moment to realize, like, it was, I mean, like, they definitely set it up with, like, the cars and the fashion for the quote unquote present day part of the story. But, like, I don't know why it just took me a minute to, like, figure out that sort of, like, the quote unquote, like, the son and the
Yeah.
wife, like, that they're maybe the
Yes.
50s,
Yeah.
40s. And, like, but it took me realizing that the prospector part is
Yeah.
father-in-law, and I was like, oh, this is a lot earlier in time than it
Yeah.
feels, because it was just like, it felt like this is like maybe like a
Yes.
grandfather, and then this is maybe like we're going between, like, there's two generation skips or some sort of connection, or we'll get there eventually, yada yada. But, like, no, it was literally just the one generation. I was like, oh, okay, all right, that's fair. And then you go back and you look and you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And obviously a hat shop makes a lot more sense in, say, like, the 40s than it
In
does
like the 60s or the
uh
70s. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But and it's not that for lack of skill on the creator's part. That was just lack of thought
Yeah.
on my part.
Yeah. As they said in the blurb, is kind of the story is told through these two alternating timelines. It kind of flits between the two. There is some dialogue in the book, but mostly it's told through, I was going to say text box, but that's not the correct. That's
Get a
yeah,
caption
caption
box, like,
boxes.
yeah.
It's kind of very much, as you say, kind of narrated to you, and
Yeah, it has a
yes,
voiceover narrator sort of feel, or just that sort of omnipresent
yeah.
storyteller sort of feel.
In terms of, the characters within the book, like, I think I agree with you. I think the wife is probably the emotional heart of the book. I think For me, stories like this, when you're talking about generational like trauma or sweeping epic things where the sins of one generation impact on the other, kind of, you'd kind of, I would expect there to be maybe like a stronger focus on the relationship between the father and the son, but that's not really there. They're kind of estranged from each other for the most part.
Which, to be fair, if you are carrying the weight of the emotional trauma of depending on, obviously generational trauma comes in all different shapes and forms and fashions, and but like if someone's I having a distant father, having absent father, I mean a father who's there but emotionally absent, can be just as affecting as having one who's
Yeah.
mean or one who's loving. These things that, and so I thought it was an interesting tact on that one. But then as we learn about that father-in-law, like his mind is full of how to scam that system without getting caught, how to use that luck to its fullest ability without people realizing that he's got it and having to pay for it, and having to pay for his own cheating and crimes throughout this, his years. And so like, dude doesn't have time to be a
Yeah.
father. This is not an excuse. Just a like, I'm realizing this as we're sitting there, like, of course he's not going to spend time connecting. He doesn't know how, and he spent his entire life focused on
Yes.
money, 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 and how to do that. And so like, I don't know. I think it's an interesting tact, but I think it definitely is still effective. But it is different because, oh my god, this is definitely, I feel like, the year or 2 years of generational trauma
Yes.
in
Yeah.
popular media, especially for children. Like the number of kids movies that deal with generational trauma these days, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, howdy. All right, then we're going
Yeah.
there. All these elder millennials and Xers have got some things to say to
Yes,
their parents.
I don't disagree with that. I think you hit on something quite interesting there about the father's single mindedness on holding on to this. It's kind of the story almost in parts reads like one of those classic Western stories where a gang stumbles across like loads of gold, and how that desire for gold can kind of twist relationships and friendships and turn people against each other. And his desire to hold on to this piece of luck, that in order to kind of get rich and profit off of it, kind of does skew everything else around in his life. He kind of, it's not even like, it doesn't even feel like at any point in this story you don't get any sense that he's actually enjoying the fruits of his wealth at any point.
No, he's just trying. I don't know, like it's
Yeah.
so procedural.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's even the point? To me, like, I don't think that's very lucky, to have a life that is just all about this cold, emotionless, like process driven life, and all about gains and money, and not being noticed as you make more money for yourself. And like, you can't enjoy those riches because you're essentially alone. And like, I don't know, man, I've never been and will probably never be rich in a single day in my life, but having friends, having family, like, I feel extremely lucky and extremely happy. And it's just like, I think that's another added layer to kind of point out that, like, luck isn't like, what is
Yes.
luck and how does it manifest, and how do you use
Yes,
it?
I think that's probably one of the things the creators are trying to get at, is you can have good fortune that brings you fortune, but that's not necessarily going to enrich your life in a way that's emotionally meaningful in any way. Get the sense, for all the wealth that he's purported to have, it's not really giving him a family or even friends, people that he can connect with. He has to keep that
Yeah.
distance from everyone, really. So yeah, I think that's also another thing about the book. I want to talk a little bit more about the art. Kind of like, I think I've previously mentioned, I think geometry plays a quite important part in the book. The other thing I kind of wanted to discuss, and I think this is the correct terminology for it, and it'd be kind of interesting to see kind of a hard copy of this, to see how, if you look at some of the panels, you can kind of see. So I'm looking at page 165. You can kind of see how some of the panels have got these like wavy lines in the background, and then other panels have got these straight lines across them. And I think that might be kind of referred as kind of like pointerism in terms of like using like these little dots to kind of create this effect.
Yeah, they read almost like a kind of like a screen
Yes,
tone of
yes,
sort.
exactly. Why do you think they did that? What type of effect do you think they were kind of like trying to generate
Hmm.
in the reader?
And it's interesting because it's something that, like, now that you point it out, I'm kind of zipping through to see how, like, what's the kind of consistency of the use of it. But it's wow, it's really
Yeah,
pervasive, isn't it? It's funny. I only really kind of paid attention to it when it was, high enough contrast area where it stood out. And usually like screen tone, half tone, those sort of things are used to just kind of create a sense of shading. But it's all over. I honestly don't know. That is such an odd texture to give everything. And occasionally it will get kind of lightened up or blurred out where, there's maybe like high highlights on faces or water. It tends to kind of fade out some when you need that high contrast. But in general, it's just kind of, and it'll, I wonder,
yeah,
and this is me pulling straight out of my behind, because it does almost have the feel of just I'm 39, so I grew up with not
yeah,
digital, with tube television. In fact, I don't think I had a digital television. I had a tube television way into like my 20s or 30s
yeah,
because it still worked. And so, like, there's almost sort of a visual texture to that analog. I think it's analog.
yeah,
Is the right word for that both the display and the
yeah,
transmission. And I doubt this is what they were going for, but it does kind of have that sort of visual artifact that you get from
yeah,
watching like an old
yeah,
show on an old
yeah,
television. But I mean, like I said, that I'm
yeah.
pulling that one right out of my butt. I am not entirely sure. It's not a technique I have really
Yeah, I
seen
mean,
before, and so
I
I'm
don't want to say
interested.
like odd, but it's not something that I'd seen before either. So I was just wondering kind of why they'd chosen to do that. And I've not read anything by these creators before, so I'm coming to this kind of like completely fresh. Is
It
there
has been
previous
it's
work
been so
kind of
many
similar to
years
this?
since I've read some old. It's been so many years since I've read some of their older stuff, and so like and that's such a little detail that I wouldn't even be able to pull
Yeah,
that from my memory. I'd have to look into it. It might just be a
yeah,
thing that they do. That's sort of a signature je ne sais quoi visual
yeah.
texture.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So we've
Interesting.
been talking about the book for about 30 minutes. I I don't know what to make of it. I think I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it. I think it's definitely worth seeking out and reading. I don't know if it's a recommendation from me or not. I enjoyed it. I think there's especially the sequences with the daughter-in-law. I think those are especially strong. Kind of like this meditation on grief and how that can kind of like these procedural steps can once you've finished dealing with kind of the procedural steps of when someone has passed away or is missing in your life and how that can kind of cover up or help you cope with some of the emotional pain of losing someone. I felt that hit particularly strongly with me. I felt this idea of is something that does kind of play a lot in my head, and kind of how the decisions of the previous generation can really detrimentally impact on the current generation. I felt those themes were it was an interesting way of exploring those themes, but like you said, it takes a little while to get into, and it does sometimes feel a bit stilted. Getting that emotional connection with a book is quite important to me, and I think it took a little while for me to connect with this book. So I don't know how did you feel about it?
I I
Yeah,
respect the
yeah,
craftsmanship. It is an incredibly well built. You can bounce a quarter off of it, man. It
yeah,
is so tight in how it is constructed. And it would definitely be something that I would probably utilize in some of my classrooms as an example for talking about how you can work within the grid and how you can utilize these sort of some of these different tools and techniques that they kind of use in ways that are a little bit more design centric. And they did some really really great thoughts with layouts that aren't fancy, and which is something that I'm always trying to find to show my students because I love them very, very much. But sometimes I get some students who like to reinvent the wheel when it comes to layouts, and it's like, oh, but we still got to be able to read it,
Yeah.
my dear baby
Yeah.
angels. So I'm always trying to find stuff that like that the far end of the spectrum. This is and you know, I obviously love a good weird wacky layout, but like man, I love it when I can find stuff that's like it follows that grid. It's very clear, it's very clean, but it still gets the job done. And so I think that there's like a lot that can be learned from it, and I would definitely use it as a tool in some of my classrooms. Oh, but emotionally, I don't. And I the books that resonate with me need to hit me in my heart and in my gut a little bit more and a little bit harder than this one.
Yes, I think I probably agree with you there. It's you need like characters to kind of latch onto, and really the only character I could personally latch onto was the character, the the daughter-in-law kind of. Yeah. Anyway, so I think it's worth seeking out just to see kind of some of the design decisions that they've
Definitely.
made around the book. I wouldn't say it's like experimental necessarily, but it's unconventional in the way they've decided to approach telling this particular story. So I think it's worth probably seeking out for that reason and no other. I would just quite quickly like to thank the publishers for sending us these advance review copies. It's always
Yes.
nice for that to happen. So I think we've got about 20-30 minutes to talk to you now, Kate, about yourself and kind of like projects that you're working on. So I think a good kind of general question to start off with is like why comic books and graphic novels?
You got a week? No. Oh gosh. Geez. Why comics? Why graphic novels? I think because they are an incredibly powerful medium as both a creator and an audience member. So you've got it's a visual storytelling medium that also allows you to use words. And so it's kind of like movies and television, but you have the page. They're still images. They're not moving images, and so then you can also bring in elements of design and art, and you can do so much wild things on a page with pictures and words that you can't always do where you're just writing words or you're just filming people doing things and saying those words, and it allows for just this expansiveness. Like it is a broad, deep sandbox as a creator to play in. And I love story. I make what I make because ever since I was a small child, I have been obsessed with stories. And for me personally, comics really was that sort of it brought everything together because I love to write, I love to draw, I love color, I love character, and and this is even better than I think any of these other mediums. While yes, I can collaborate with other creators, if I have an idea for a story, I don't have to wait for anyone else to make it because I know how to write, I know how to draw, I know how to ink, I know how to color, and I can letter if you twist my arm. And if a publisher doesn't want it, we have the internet. We have so many different ways to self-publish these days. So there's like the gates are wide open, and so it's just such this it's powerful.
Yeah.
Like so that's the
Yeah.
that's the shortest I think answer I
Yeah,
can give you on that.
yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially I think it's different in places like France and in Japan. I think in America and the United Kingdom, I think differing extents. I think comics and graphic novels are probably more widely respected in the United States than they are in the UK because whenever I tend to kind of mention my interest in like comic books and graphic novels to people, a far more common response than I would like is, "Oh, isn't that just all like superhero stuff?" And
I mean, to be fair, you get a
Yeah,
lot of that in the
yeah,
States too. It really, I think, unless you are in
yeah,
the Franco-Belgian, in the Francophone, like you're not going to get that. Like, yeah, this is literally a ninth. Like in the Francophone, it's like referred to as like I
yeah,
believe the
yeah.
ninth art form in like, which it is. It is definitely belongs on that list of capital A
I think
art.
you
But
can
like,
maybe
yeah,
make the argument like historically, um, is maybe the first art form. Kind of like we've been mixing pictures and images and words together since like probably day dot. So I don't. Yeah. Anyway, um, so yeah, I think it's I agree with. I think it's a really when there's certain stories that can really only be told in kind of like comic books, and the best way to tell them is in comic books. And so I definitely agree with that. So, what kind of one of the questions I like to ask when I'm talking to artists is kind of what is your process? Do you tend to work with paper or digital? Kind of like what is your work setup? Do you have a studio? Do you work in bed on an iPad? Kind of how does that tend to work for you?
So, to go back, the tools of my particular trade right
Yeah,
now, where I'm at these days, is an iPad Pro and Clip Studio Paint. With I will letter and Illustrator. Oh my God, this is something I'm constantly trying to shake my students out of. Don't letter in a non-vector based program, you guys, please. If it's going to print, please. But so like, I will definitely bust out Illustrator. Although I've been dabbling with Affinity
yay,
Designer
Infinity
because
Designer. Yeah,
who doesn't want to
yeah,
get that
yeah,
Adobe cord these days? But no, man, like iPad Pro and Clip Studio and the Apple Pencil is my main go-to these days. Process wise, if I'm uh, doing the if I'm working with an editor who like knows me and is cool with this, I will generally do thumbnails or layouts, skip as much of the pencil step as possible, and then jump right into the inks because I really want to have that incredibly live, active, spontaneous line work that is really, really hard to get digitally because you have edit undo.
yeah,
And but that said, like to folks coming up, I've drawn about 1,000 plus comic pages in my life to date, so I feel really comfortable not having everything planned out, plotted out. I feel really comfortable about how I form and render things. So like me skipping over the pencil stage, like it's a different beast than someone who is still kind of figuring a lot of their visual language out. And so like do as I say, not as I do, and don't cut out that pencil stage, especially for my noobs and my younger creators. But I'm definitely I want to jump over that. Plus, also, oh my god, I just if anything takes too long, I lose interest and wander off, and so I got to get stuff
yeah.
done
Okay, that's
fast.
really because that is really different to like what a lot of the other characters I've spoken to. They kind of do take maybe a little bit more time with the penciling stage, making sure like the layout is roughly correct, and then kind of just getting those kind of angles and stuff like that correct. Um, uh, kind of as well, but kind of the other thing that you mentioned there that I think is a recurring theme in most of the people that I've spoken to, or all the people that I've spoken to, is how important speed is. Kind of being able to kind of get work done quickly and efficiently, and finding your own shortcuts enabling you to do enabling to do that, especially if you want to be a professional. I think it's really really important. Maybe a bit of a geeky techie question. Do you in kind of like the tools that you do you create your own like paintbrushes and stuff like that, or do you just kind of rely on like the paintbrushes that they've got within?
Every time I try to fiddle around with it, I always make things worse. I always come up with a really dumb brush. And so I've been lucky enough. I really love the Frenden, Frenden set of brushes for Clip Studio. I think currently right now he's up to like
Okay.
900 brushes for like maybe $15 or something. And every time he updates, like you get the updates for free. So like it's the biggest value for your, bang for your buck. So I love the Frinden brushes. Now, if you want to get a little pricey, I'm also really, really enjoying a lot of the brushes coming out of True Grit Supply. They've got just, especially if you're wanting stuff that feels a little bit messier, a little bit more lo-fi. They've got a ton of like half tones and texturizers and stippling, and just like their brush set, their inking set that just has like just all sorts of sloppy messes, and I'm really quite liking that a lot. But they're unfortunately not on the cheaper end of things. Not expensive, but like also if you're a student and spending $5 on Clip Studio a month is too much, then they might be a little
Yeah.
bit out of your price
Okay.
range. But at the very least, like their inking set, if you don't get a bunch of their other fun bells and whistles, I recommend them a
Yeah.
lot. So
So you're sitting down to draw a comic. Kind of what does your kind of a setup look like? I've spoken to people that will go to the park and sit underneath a tree and work from there. I've spoken to people that will just stay in bed, think between their Cintiq pad and like their phone and stuff like that. And I've spoken to people that need to go to a specific studio. So how does that kind of look like?
currently, I tend to sit on my couch or on my patio. I I purposefully, so I got the job teaching at SCAD fall of 2019, and when I moved down here, I specifically got a 2-bedroom apartment so that the second bedroom would be my office, and I set it up as an office, and it was working great as an office. And then COVID hit, and I had to teach from my second bedroom for like a year and a half, and it drove me absolutely insane. And so I unfortunately have this wonderful office space that I I hate to be in. Because the pandemic just like completely, like it's like when you eat a food and then you get sick after, you're like, oh, I'm never going to eat that again. And so, I just have this aversion to my really lovely office space. And so I shrimp it up on the couch or out on my like patio, which is terrible. I try to counteract that with as much, stretching activities and physical activities as possible, but goodness knows I'm going to turn into a giant capital C by my 40th
Yeah, I
birthday, I'm
think
sure.
this is but people don't realize kind of how bad sitting at a desk or sitting in a couch or sitting in bed is for your body. You need to kind of like get around and walk and stuff like that. I remember speaking to one of my friends. He works at a computer all day, and he was one of his friends is a musician, and they were kind of exchanging horror stories about kind of different injuries that they were kind of like musicians. They sit all day kind of in a particular position, whether it's a violin or a saxophone person, and you get these weird clicks and creaks in your elbows and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely good advice to get out there and exercise, and yeah, don't turn into a big C, please.
It's cliche for a reason, y'all. Like, do some yoga, do some stretching exercises. If you're not a big cardio person, at least do some walks, do some strengthening exercises, especially for your wrists and your shoulders, and back and core. People forget that how important your core is for ergonomics. And so, make sure you're taking a holistic approach to all this, so that even if you are like me and you're lazy, and you sit on your couch and draw, like you're you're at least not
Yeah,
totally 100%
yeah,
wrecking your job.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about comics and the stuff that you enjoy reading and the stuff that you enjoy creating. So kind of what were your earliest memories about the comics that kind of really grabbed you, and kind of what stuff are you enjoying reading at the moment?
Oh gosh. I did not come from a comic family. Honestly, anything my family knows about comics, they either learned from me, or the MCU. Uh, So I was a young girl in the 90s, which was not a time to go alone into comic shops, especially not in the Midwest. But I remember being about 12 or 13 and getting up the courage to go into our local shop because it always was interesting. Like, I don't know, just the posters they'd have in the windows, like they looked neat. And I wanted to know what comics all about. And I mean, I read the daily funnies every day. I was perfect age, Calvin and Hobbes, Far Side, the perfect daily newspaper era. But beyond that, like, no comic book. And so, like, I get up the courage to go in, and I am just like terrified to touch anything, terrified to look at anything. But I'm looking over Sandman, and the volumes of Sandman at the time, and this is like 97. And the owner of the shop comes over, takes the book out of my hand, puts it back on the shelf, and points to the back corner, and he's like, "The manga's over there."
Oh, how dare you!
Right? But to be fair, I go over there just because I'm like, well, what's manga? Because like
Yeah.
it's 97. This is well before you have aisles and aisles and aisles of it at Barnes and Noble, and the internet is barely a thing, and so I go over there, and like this was mixing before it was Tokyo Pop, before all this. They had like, it was a kind of like a Shonen Jump where you'd have one chapter from a bunch of different series. But like the series they had in it was Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Harlem Beat, which was a street basketball sports manga. Okay, not quite the same thing, but sure. And Magic Knight Rayearth. All right, that's a little bit of a darker Sailor Moon, magical girl, isekai. All right. And then Ice Blade, which was this hyper violent, super dark noir manga, and Parasite, which is, for those unfamiliar, an incredibly violent, incredibly vicious horror sci-fi series. So it was like I picked up a mixine. That was also at the period that like Dark Horse was doing weird things to Blade of the Immortal. They would put out the chat, like they would do monthly issues, but they put it out at standard American size, and they'd flip everything, but it was still Blade of the Immortal, so it was violent and vicious and beautiful. And so like I got into some weird shit. Sorry, stuff. I apologize if we don't want cursing on your
swear words. It's not a PG.
good. So like, little did dude running the shop know, he definitely introduced me to some really lovely weird shit. And so I definitely came up through that. And then as I got older, the local library near me had a very strange collection of indie and small press at a time, again, like this is late 90s, early aughts. This is not a time when your local public library had many comics, let alone like Dykes to Watch Out For and The Crow and anything by Daniel Clowes. And so my next step was getting into a lot of the alt in indie scene. And so it really wasn't, I didn't read my first superhero comic properly until after Avengers came out, the movie.
All right. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there was too much. There was too much to get into, and it was
I
just,
think
I didn't know how
that's probably the reason I stopped reading superhero comics. It was just kind of like for me to understand what's going on, I have to like read like 15 titles a month, and it's just like, it was like, I can't invest.
And before the TPB, you'd have to go back and find all the loose issues floating around in the bins, and like it's like, this is not worth
really
it.
interesting what you said about the library, because the library, the local libraries in London played quite a big part in me getting back into comics, and they also had a weird mix of like superhero comics, but also kind of a lot of independent stuff. as well. I say independent, but kind of like non-superhero comics. So they had like copies of like Mouse and lots of Vertigo titles and Daniel Clowes books.
Oh my God.
Um,
When I found Mouse at my local library,
yeah,
it was a revelation. And so, anytime I hear someone's trying to ban it again, I'm like, all right, who needs me to buy you a copy of Mouse? Like, y'all this needs
yeah,
to be in our lives.
I mean,
It's cliche, but it
yeah,
is so important.
I don't really understand like the banned books list in the United States at all. It's really, and this, I think I saw, anyway, yeah, it's a
That's a
whole
whole nother
another
conversation for a whole nother day.
conversation. So, what type of stories do you kind of like enjoy creating, and what draws you to wanting to kind of create those sorts of
I
things?
I am always, I'm always game for horror. Horror is definitely my bread and butter as a creator, and definitely something that I adore as a consumer. Definitely cut my teeth on Stephen King when I was like in fifth grade, and like haven't looked back since. And way too old or way too young to be reading that stuff. But and so there's horror, but I also have this like deep abiding love for autobio, even though it also like enrages me as much as I love it. And I think my favorite subgenre of comics is, the alt sad white boys complaining about their sad white dicks from like the 80s and 90s. Like they're horrible, and I
Yeah,
love all
yeah,
of them so much. And honestly, anything that's just kind of art visually different or thematically unusual or structurally challenging, like I'm just always on the hunt for like who is pushing the boundaries of the art form, and how are they doing that, and or are they it's I mean, obviously sometimes you just love your standard fare. I also love manga. I mean, like I love a lot of different manga, but like I mean, sometimes you just want to go and read like Fruits Basket, where it's just teen girl stuff with a
yeah.
little bit of magic. But like I mean, but then I also absolutely adored like Taya Matsumoto, who is always visually and story wise pushing the envelope of what the page can do. So I don't know, I'm a bit of an omnivore, and I don't even mind superhero stuff. Like, man, like that Fraction run of
Yeah.
Hawkeye was
Wow.
great.
Yeah.
I love the Fool She-Hulk, the Wade Daredevil. Like I'm not opposed, because I grew up watching like the Batman animated series and the Batman 66, the really cheesy campy TV show, and I had that in my life growing up. I just didn't read the comics. So if there's something that can be kind of contained, that I can come to it and enjoy it for what it is, and not have to read 5 different books to know what's going on in this one in front of me, then I'm
That
down for
sounds great.
that.
Kind of getting back to your kind of creative process, you write as well. What does your, because you draw as well as write, what does that process look like for you? Because I occasionally write my own comics as well. I've not, I say I can't draw. I've not spent the time developing drawing skills. I think that's what I've been told. It's not that I can't draw. I've not developed the time developing my drawing skills. So how does that process work for you? Do you start out with a script? Do you start out with thumbnails? Or do you just bravely just start drawing the comic? How does that
If I'm working with the publisher, obviously you got to write that script, because that editor's you got to give
yeah.
them something to hang their hat on. And so I have a tendency to, like I said, if I'm going through a publisher, I'll be much more formalistic about my approach. But no matter how I'm approaching it, I have to have the entire thing outlined. I also tend to, when I'm writing, I do self-contained stories. I don't want to do anything that just is ongoing and just kind of goes and goes and goes and goes and goes ad infinitum. I am very formalistic in the sense that I like arcs. I like character arcs. I like story arcs. I like having an end point. So I will outline everything first before I even go into anything else. Sometimes I will be a little bit more fluid about how deep into the scripting I go. And sometimes I'll even not even write dialogue until I have the page in front of me, and then I just put words into the characters' mouths. But I tend to need to have a roadmap. I have to have somewhere to go before I start, and I words work just fine for me. I know some folks who will definitely script better by just the visuals, thumbnails, things like that, and um, I tend to have to start with words before I get to pictures, even though I have both at my disposal. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know. Brains are weird.
yeah.
That's how mine
I think one of the
works.
things that really changed the way that I, especially kind of when I was actually collaborating with people, is actually um, lettering comics and realizing, oh, I can't have like 150 words of dialogue in
Yep.
like one speed, kind of like that. Like for me, getting so it's you saying you kind of put the dialogue in last. Like for me, that's almost the first thing that I start off with, because like this idea of being economical, that's not the right way of saying it, having kind of like efficacy with the amount of words that you're using, I think is really important, because you don't want to drown out the art. So it's yes, yeah,
And comics is
yeah,
all about real estate, and you have very limited real estate to tell your story in. A lot less than a prose book will have. And, word wise, you have so little space. Like, good rule of thumb is maximum 30 words per panel on a page that has an
yeah,
average 5 to 7 panels. That's not a lot of words per panel. And so you got to be real smart about, if you want to max that out, like, okay, how can we balance this out? And is this a fighting scene? Why are they talking so much? We can't see the action if they're talking too much. But like, if it's a talky scene, it's why do you have, if it's a very talky scene, why are there 20 panels on this page? Like, it's a I think that that is probably even for someone who has the visual side of it, the visual background of it on my end, like like you said, using being economical with your words and your language, and making space and finding that balance between that and the visuals is so important as a writer. Easy to forget,
yeah.
even if you are
I
an
mean,
artist as
I
well.
remember recently I got advanced. I say advanced review copies, but they're comic books that have been out for um ages. Is Brian Michael Bendis's Torso? Have you read that?
Mhm. Not yet, but it is on
Okay,
my it's in
I
my pile by my bed.
it
Very
really
big
annoyed
pile.
me. The amount of dialogue and text that he's got on the page is, I mean, like his editor should have grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and said, "Look, what are you doing? You can't see anything that's going on with the art." And it just, when you've got that amount of text on the page, it kind of distorts what the art is doing. So yes, I think
Yeah.
that's one thing that I've kind of really uh, uh, taken home as a creator myself. I'm aware we're kind of like coming up to an hour. I've just got a couple more questions for you. So, what projects are you working on at the moment?
Currently, at the moment, I am in the pitching stage, trying to kind of find some homes for. I've got a couple of graphic novels uh, that I'm looking for. I'm working on developing a personal self publishing project. Probably would end up just being like a web comic. I don't know if I really have the energy to do Kickstarter these days. Um, and Obviously, gearing up for the school year, since that starts on Monday. At least for, I teach on a quarter system, so like we have this really long, wonderful summer, and unfortunately, it is wrapping up, and so that's going to definitely be a lot of that taking up my time. But of course, I've got a couple of fall cons coming up that I'll be working, and I'm always pushing. I had a new book come out in June, that was Silk Hills. I did the art for that, and it was written by one of my dearest friends and another regular collaborator. So Brian Lovell, who is the best of the best, and Ryan Ferrier, and which I think, if since I don't know how your fall is over there, but like I think everyone here in the States are having hot
I mean,
falls right now.
it's it's still quite warm over here. We had a heat wave here until like 2 3 weeks ago, so like the weather has got considerably cooler, but it's still warmer than it should be. Yeah,
And so it doesn't quite feel like
yeah,
spooky season yet, but like I want to transition to spooky stuff. Well, Silk Hills, and then also my other Crater and book that was also Brian Level co-wrote that as well alongside Andy Eschenbach. There are some good horror adjacent books that are a little sweatier, a little hotter, so might help bridge that transition from this never-ending summer into spooky season if folks are looking for something for that. And that is Silk Hills and Chained to the Grave. And that's kind of, oh
yeah,
gosh, I'm sure I have a million
yeah,
other things going on the back burner. These are kind
yeah,
of the big
yeah.
boys right now.
But one question I've got about teaching has so I teach kind of martial arts, and teaching martial arts has definitely changed the way that I approach practicing martial arts. Has teaching had the same effect on you? Yeah.
Oh, all the time. Oh my gosh. It has definitely changed, and it continues to change, and it will continue to change because I try not to approach teaching from the point of view of I know everything and you need to learn from me. Is more of a let's have a dialogue and learn together. And because goodness knows, there's a lot of stuff I know, but man, my kiddos are 20 years younger than me. They know a lot of stuff I don't, and so I'm constantly learning new things. And just through the course of just building out lesson plans, I'm learning new things, and working with the amazingly talented professors that I work with in my department, I'm learning new things. And so I feel like it is in all the best ways. uh, I'm growing and changing and pushing my work and myself forward as a teacher, and I wouldn't have
Yeah.
it any other way. I love it.
So
Love it.
kind of
Love
just
it.
the last two questions from me really. I always like to kind of almost always finish on this question. What does success look like for you?
Being content. It's I mean, like, yeah, we all have our little things. Like, yeah, I'd like to. I mean, yeah, sure, an Eisner would be nice, or a book deal with this publisher or that publisher. Which Fantagraphics, please. This would be feathers in the cap, and that's lovely. But I just want to go to bed at the end of most days, because it's not going to be every day, because that's life. But I want to go to bed content most days with, this was a good day, or I had a good conversation here, or I made some good progress on this, and I'm pleased with where I'm at. That's kind of a successful life for me, is one that is a content life.
And that is something a lot of creatives has said to me, is of having that contentment. I think so long as I think a word that comes up a lot is like fulfilled, like both like financially and
Yeah.
creatively. And it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. Unfortunately, you have to work quite hard to kind of get there. Um, uh,
I mean, like, the nice thing is that I have
yeah,
a quote unquote day job, and so financially, that I'm very fulfilled with the teaching, and I'm emotionally and mentally and fulfilled with that. So, like, I am count my blessings with that, because yeah, that financial aspect of trying to create a fulfilling, uh, creative life can be
yeah.
an extreme challenge. And so, like, anyone out there who thinks that you have to just do art full time, or else you are not a successful
I don't.
creator,
Almost none of the
brush.
artists that I've spoken to do that. Almost all of them have got other jobs or other gigs that pay the bills. It's just kind of especially if you're working in comics.
And and if you can find a day job that pleases you, like I said, like I teach, I love it. Two of my favorite co-creators, Brian Level and Andy Eschenbach, they both have their own tattoo studios. Like find that day job that helps take the financial stress off your shoulders, that hopefully can also make you happy, but then also allows for you the time to pursue your creative work. And you never know where things will go with that, but like, don't get down on yourself if you have to have a quote unquote day job. Hell, I worked in insurance for a number of years just to make sure my bills were paid. And I would not have a comics career if I didn't have that
Yeah.
insurance job.
Okay.
That's the truth of that.
And the last question I always finish off with is: there any topics or questions that I haven't asked or we haven't discussed that you'd like me to ask or discuss now?
I think we covered all
Okay,
the high points.
that's great.
I mean, there's always I can talk for days, honey, but we are
Yeah,
definitely getting to the end of that hour.
yeah.
Well, we're
Okay,
way over that hour, so
okay,
we can
great.
definitely wrap.
So thank you, Kate, for taking the time to speak to me today. Can you tell people where they can find you on the internet and stuff like that?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram real regularly. My handle is at KateSherron, at Kate Sherron, one word, on both Twitter and Instagram. My website is katesherron.com. If you got to send me an email, katesherron@gmail.com. I have a brother in marketing, and he gave me the right advice many moons ago to get my name on everything. And so I'm very, very, if you can remember how to spell Sharon, then you will find me very, very easily. And if you are in the Savannah, Georgia region, do not hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to connect with the community down here.
That's
So
great. Okay, so just a few closing words from me. So Cole is doing some really great stuff on the Seafood Panel YouTube channel. He's doing these video breakdowns, discussions of books from his pull list and books that he's backed on Kickstarter. So definitely check that out on our YouTube channel. I will be continuing to do these like guest hosting episodes until Cole is well enough to kind of come back on the pod. So yeah, so please, if you can support the pod by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to us, or if you can donate something in the tip jar, the link is in the episode description. That'll be also fantastic. And we're looking for recommendations, so if you've got any comic books or graphic novels that you'd like us to review, please email them to us at seafoodpanel@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Kate. Let's say bye.
bye.